When Ruth collapsed at my retirement party, I knew right away that glass was never meant for her. The champagne spilled across my kitchen floor and everyone started shouting. My daughter-in-law, Marissa, screamed for help. My son tried to look shocked, but I saw the truth on both of their faces. Just 2 hours earlier, I watched Marissa pour something into my drink. She thought I didn't see it. She thought age made me blind. But I spent 40 years as a doctor. I notice everything. That party was supposed to celebrate my new beginning. Instead, it showed me that my own family wanted me gone, for the money I had worked my whole life to earn. Before I tell you what I did next, make sure you're following this story, because what happened after that night changed everything. It all started with a sound. A glass hit the floor, rolled once, and stopped near my kitchen counter. Champagne spilled across the marble tiles, bubbles popping one by one. I turned just in time to see Ruth Marlowe, my daughter-in-law's mother, collapse. Her hands were shaking, her mouth foaming at the corners. Someone screamed her name, someone else called for help. The music stopped. People ran around shouting. My son Daniel froze. His wife Marissa rushed forward and fell to her knees next to Ruth, crying, "Mom, Mom, stay with me." And I just stood there. I didn't move, didn't make a sound. Because the moment Ruth hit the floor, I already knew what had happened. That drink wasn't meant for her. It was meant for me. My name is Vivian Cole, 70 years old. I'm a retired doctor. I've spent most of my life in operating rooms, watching people's hands tremble right before they make a mistake or tell a lie. I notice everything. I always have. That night was supposed to be my retirement party. Daniel said I deserved to celebrate after selling my clinic, the business I built from nothing after my husband died. He insisted I let Marissa handle everything. "You just relax, Mom," he said. "Let her take care of it." That should have been my first warning. Marissa never took care of anything. She wasn't the kind of woman who cooked or cleaned or even showed up on time. But that night she was different. She was smiling, greeting guests, pouring drinks, making sure everything looked perfect. She even called Ruth to come early and help her set up. I remember thinking how strange that was. Marissa and her mother didn't even get along most days. When I looked over at the drinks table, I saw Marissa holding a small glass bottle, one of those tiny dropper ones you'd use for essential oils. She glanced around, then poured a few drops into a single glass of champagne, the one with a small chip on the rim, the one I always used at parties. I didn't shout. I didn't stop her. I just kept watching. She carried that glass toward me, smiling like she always does when she wants something. "Vivian, you've worked so hard," she said. "You deserve a toast." I took the glass, thanked her, and waited. 10 minutes later, she got distracted showing off her new bracelet. That's when Ruth, poor, sweet Ruth, walked over, picked up the same glass, and took a sip. I didn't stop her. I couldn't. Not without making a scene. 5 minutes later, Ruth was on the ground, shaking. The guests panicked. Marissa played the perfect daughter, crying and screaming for help. Daniel hovered behind her, pale and nervous. I noticed how he didn't go near the drinks table again. When the paramedics came, they said Ruth was breathing but unresponsive. They loaded her onto a stretcher and rushed her to the hospital. Everyone looked worried, but I saw something else in Marissa's eyes. Fear. The kind of fear you only have when something goes wrong with a plan. I didn't cry. I didn't say a word. I just watched. Because after 70 years on this earth, I've learned something important. When someone tries to hurt you, you don't react. You observe. As the ambulance doors closed, Marissa turned to me and whispered, "I don't know what happened." Her voice shook. I smiled. "Neither do I said. But I did. I knew exactly what happened. I just didn't know she'd drink my glass. That was the night everything changed. The night I realized the people I called family weren't family at all. 2 hours before everything went wrong, my house was full of noise. People were laughing, music was playing, and the smell of roasted chicken filled the kitchen. It was supposed to be a good night. My retirement party. After 40 years running Cole Family Clinic, I had finally decided to sell it. Everyone said I should rest, travel, enjoy life. I told them I would. I even started to believe it myself. Daniel, my son, had insisted on throwing the party. "You deserve it, Mom," he said. "You've worked hard your whole life." He looked proud. I wanted to believe him too. Marissa, his wife, had taken over everything. The food, the decorations, the guest list. That alone should have made me suspicious. Marissa never liked doing housework. She wasn't the kind of woman who stayed up late to clean up after anyone, but that night she was a completely different person. Smiling, running around, arranging flowers, checking the champagne glasses. I even said to myself, Marissa has never volunteered for dishes, but tonight she's Martha Stewart with poison. I didn't know how true that thought was until later. The living room was warm and bright. People from my clinic came, a few neighbors, even my old college friend Helen. Everyone kept congratulating me on the sale. $23 million. You must feel so proud, they said. I smiled, nodded, thanked them politely. But behind the smiles, I felt a strange tension in the air, something I couldn't quite name yet. Daniel moved around the room, greeting people, checking his phone every few minutes. Marissa stayed near the drink table, rearranging bottles that didn't need rearranging. She laughed too loudly at jokes. She kept glancing at me, then looking away. I'd seen that look before. In the operating room, right before a nurse dropped a scalpel or a student made a mistake. Nervous hands, forced smiles, small signs that something wasn't right. I tried to shake it off. I told myself I was being paranoid. But then I saw it. Marissa reached into her purse and pulled out a small glass dropper bottle. She looked around to make sure no one was watching. Then she poured a few drops into one of the champagne glasses, the one with the little chip on the rim. My glass. The one I always used at parties. My first instinct was to stop her, to shout, to call her out in front of everyone. But I didn't. Instead, I stood very still and just watched. When you've lived as long as I have, you learn that yelling too early only warns the snake. I wanted to see what she would do next. Marissa straightened up, smiled, and placed the glass back on the table as if nothing had happened. A minute later, she picked it up again and started walking toward me. That was when every memory I had of her came rushing back. The first time Daniel brought her home, the way she looked around my living room like she was measuring its worth, the polite smile that never reached her eyes. I remembered the way my husband used to watch people, quiet but alert. He once told me, "Watch their hands, Viv. Hands tell the truth before the mouth does." And there she was, Marissa, walking toward me with both hands shaking just a little. She smiled and held the glass out to me. "Vivian, you've worked so hard. Let me make the first toast." I took the glass. "Thank you, Marissa," I said. My voice didn't shake. My smile didn't fade. She had no idea that I had already seen everything I needed to see. A few minutes later, Ruth, her mother, came over. Ruth was kind, a bit scatterbrained, always trying too hard to please everyone. She'd been standing near the buffet, chatting with one of the nurses. When Marissa turned away to show off her new tennis bracelet, I quietly set my glass down on the counter beside Ruth's purse. Ruth reached for it without thinking. "Oh, I don't have a drink yet," she said. She took the glass and smiled at me. "You always pick the best champagne, Vivian." I wanted to stop her. God knows I did. But how could I explain it? How could I tell her that her daughter just tried to poison me in front of 30 guests? So I watched. I waited. And I told myself that maybe I was wrong. Maybe I misread what I saw. But when Ruth took that first sip, I felt my stomach twist. Her face didn't change at first. Then, a few minutes later, she started rubbing her chest. She said the champagne tasted different. I kept my eyes on Marissa. She noticed, too. Her smile faded for a second, and in that second, I saw panic. Real panic. She knew exactly what was in that glass. When Ruth finally collapsed, I wasn't surprised. Everyone else screamed, but I didn't. I couldn't. My heart was pounding, but my mind was calm. Because deep down, I already understood the truth, and it was much darker than anyone in that room could imagine. That drink wasn't meant for Ruth. It was meant for me. And that night, I made a quiet promise to myself. I wouldn't say a word until I knew everything. People like Marissa always think older women are easy to fool, but they forget. We've seen too much. We know how to wait, and when the time comes, we don't miss. Everything after that moment happened fast. People started shouting, calling for help. Someone grabbed their phone and yelled, "Call 911." Chairs fell, glasses broke, the music cut off halfway through a song. My quiet house turned into chaos. Marissa screamed, "Oh my God, Mom!" Her voice cracked just enough to sound real. She dropped to the floor beside Ruth, shaking her shoulder, pretending to panic. Daniel pushed through the crowd. "What happened?" he asked, breathless. He knelt next to Marissa, touching Ruth's wrist like he knew what he was doing. But I noticed something else. The way he looked at Marissa for just a split second, A quick glance that said more than words ever could. He wasn't shocked. He was checking to see if the plan had gone wrong. That look told me everything. The paramedics arrived within minutes. They worked fast, checking Ruth's pulse, loading her onto a stretcher. Someone said possible poisoning. Someone else said heart attack. I stood by the counter, still holding my napkin, watching every detail. Marissa clung to Daniel, crying loudly. She was fine a minute ago, she said. She was laughing, drinking champagne. Then she just fell. I almost laughed at how good she was. She had everyone fooled. Her makeup smudged just right, her voice breaking at the perfect moments. When they carried Ruth out the front door, Marissa followed close behind. Daniel turned to me. "Mom, are you okay? You look pale." "I'm fine," I said. "Go with your wife." He nodded a little too quickly. "We'll meet you at the hospital." After they left, the house fell into an eerie quiet. Guests whispered, unsure if they should stay or leave. Some tried to comfort me, but I barely heard them. I just stared at the half-empty champagne bottle sitting on the counter. The light from the chandelier reflected off the glass, and I could see tiny bubbles still rising to the top. I poured what was left down the sink. I didn't want anyone else touching it. A neighbor offered to drive me to the hospital. I said no. I wanted to drive myself. I needed the time to think. The drive to Summit View Medical Center felt longer than usual. Snow kept falling, heavy and quiet. My hands didn't shake on the steering wheel. They hadn't shaken since the night my husband died, and they weren't going to start now. When I got to the hospital, Marissa was already there, sitting in the waiting room with her head buried in her hands. Daniel sat beside her, his leg bouncing nervously. I noticed how he didn't hold her hand. I walked up to the nurse's desk and asked about Ruth. The nurse said she was stable but unconscious. "Short-term memory loss," she added. "Probably temporary. We're still running tests." Marissa stood up quickly when she saw me. "Vivian," she said, her voice full of fake concern. "You shouldn't have driven here alone. You must be exhausted. Please, go. Home. We'll stay with Mom." She said it like she was doing me a favor, like she cared. But her eyes wouldn't meet mine. Daniel put a hand on my arm. "She's right, Mom. You should rest. We'll handle everything." That's when I knew they didn't want me near Ruth. They were afraid she might wake up and remember something. I smiled. "Thank you, but I'll wait a little while," I said. They exchanged a quick glance, the kind of silent conversation couples have when they think no one's watching. I'd seen that look hundreds of times between patients' families. The guilty ones always spoke without words. Eventually, they went to talk to the doctor. I watched them through the glass window of the hallway. Marissa was doing all the talking. Daniel kept nodding, barely saying a word. When they came back, Marissa told me the doctor thought it was a reaction to her medication. She said it quickly, like she wanted to get the words out before I could ask questions. I nodded slowly. "That's good news," I said. "She's lucky to have you two." They both smiled, but I could tell their smiles were forced. A few hours later, Ruth was moved to a private room. The doctor said she'd be okay, but needed rest. Marissa insisted on staying overnight. "Family only," the nurse said politely. Marissa looked at me and said, "Don't worry, Vivian. I'll stay with her. You can go home." I could hear the message behind her words. Don't come near Ruth. Daniel walked me out to my car. "Try to sleep, Mom," he said. We'll keep you updated." I nodded and started the car. Through the window, I saw them standing together in the parking lot, whispering. Marissa looked angry, waving her hands. Daniel looked scared. Then they got into their car and drove off. I sat there for a minute, watching the snow fall on the windshield. The world outside looked peaceful again, quiet, white, empty. Inside, I felt something I hadn't felt in a long time. Not fear, not sadness, clarity. Everyone else saw a young couple taking care of their sick mother, but I saw something else. They looked like caretakers to everyone else, but to me, they looked like undertakers waiting for the paperwork. And if they thought I was going to let them bury me next, they were about to learn I don't go quietly. The next morning, the house was too quiet. Snow covered everything outside, the driveway, the steps, even the mail that no one had brought in. The air felt still, heavy, like the whole world was holding its breath. I sat at the kitchen table, still wearing the same sweater from last night. I didn't sleep. I just waited for morning, thinking about every detail. The smell of the champagne, the way Marissa's hands shook, the sound of Ruth hitting the floor. It kept replaying in my head like a movie I couldn't turn off. I made coffee, black and strong. Old habits die hard. Back when I worked at the clinic, I used to start every day like this, quiet, focused, no distractions. The difference now was what I was thinking about. Not patients, not schedules, but poison. I opened the old leather notebook I used to keep for case notes. The pages were yellow, the lines faint. I started writing. Time of collapse, 8:47 p.m. Observed symptoms, tremors, vomiting foam, partial consciousness, possible ingestion, champagne, approximately 2 sips. Then I paused. There had been a smell, faint, bitter, right before Ruth fell. It wasn't perfume or alcohol. I knew that smell. I'd smelled it once before, years ago, during a toxicology lecture. Bitter almond oleander. The thought made my stomach tighten. Oleander alkaloid, a poison made from the flowers that grow all over this state. Beautiful to look at. Deadly if used wrong. Marissa wouldn't have known that from her own head. Someone must have told her. Someone who understood how to hide it. Maybe Daniel. Maybe both of them. I closed the notebook and sat still for a while, just listening. The clock ticked in the hallway. The heater clicked on. I could hear the faint hum of the refrigerator. It was strange how normal everything felt when you knew something terrible had happened right here just hours ago. Then the phone rang. I stared at it for a second before picking up. Vivian? Marissa's voice, too calm, too controlled. Yes? I just wanted to check on you. After last night, I couldn't sleep. I kept thinking, what if something in the food was bad? Or maybe the champagne? You didn't feel sick, did you? Her tone was soft, but I could hear what she was really asking. She wasn't worried about me. She was checking if her plan had worked. Not at all, I said. My voice stayed steady. I feel perfectly fine, but I think I'll have that champagne tested just for peace of mind. There was a long pause. Not even a breath. Just silence. Then she spoke again, quick and nervous. Oh, I'm sure it's nothing. Ruth's doctor said she probably had a reaction to her medication. You know how she is. Of course, I said. It must have been that. We said goodbye, and I hung up. I stared at the phone for a long time after that. I could almost see her face through the silence. The forced smile, the eyes darting to Daniel, the panics, building behind the calm. She knew what she did. And now she knew I knew. I walked over to the counter. The bottle of champagne from last night was still there, 3/4 full. I picked it up and turned it slowly in my hand. The gold foil around the neck was smudged. Her fingerprints, maybe. Evidence, maybe. I set it down carefully and took a slow breath. My heart was steady. My mind was clear. They thought age made me weak. That getting old made me forgetful, distracted, easy to fool. But the truth is, age doesn't dull instincts, it sharpens them. Because when you've lived long enough, you stop guessing. You start knowing. And I knew one thing for sure that morning. If Marissa had tried once, she'd try again. So I made myself another cup of coffee, opened my notebook, and started planning. The morning after that phone call from Marissa, I tried to keep my day simple. I cleaned the kitchen, watered the plants, and sat by the window with my coffee. The snow outside was starting to melt. For a little while, I almost felt calm again. That peace didn't last long, though. Around 8:30, I heard a knock on the door. When I opened it, Daniel was standing there with a white pastry box in his hands. He smiled like he always did when he wanted something from me. "Morning, Mom," he said. "I thought you could use some breakfast. I stopped by Miller's Bakery on the way here." That name took me back. Miller's Bakery was our spot when he was little. I used to take him there every Friday after school if he'd had a good week. He'd always pick the same thing, a cinnamon roll with too much icing, and he'd end up with sugar all over his face. Those mornings were messy but happy. He was just a boy then, proud to sit across from me and tell me about his day. I stepped aside and let him in. He went straight to the kitchen like he used to when he still lived here. "You didn't sleep much, did you?" he asked, looking at the dark circles under my eyes. "I slept enough," I said, even though we both knew I hadn't. I poured him some coffee and sat down at the table. The smell of cinnamon and sugar filled the room. He opened the box and smiled. "Still your favorite," he said. We sat quietly for a while. He looked around the kitchen, his eyes landing on the empty champagne bottle sitting by the sink. He didn't ask about it, and I didn't offer an explanation. He just kept stirring his coffee, tapping the spoon against the cup over and over like he was waiting for the right moment to say what he came here to say. "Mom," he said finally, "you're alone in this big house now. Doesn't that worry you sometimes?" I looked at him and waited. "What do you mean?" "I mean, what if something happens?" he said. "A fall, a heart problem, anything. What if no one finds you for hours?" I knew where this was going. He was using concern as an entry point, softening me up. He always tried to sound caring when he had an agenda. "I spent decades saving lives alone in operating rooms, Daniel," I said. "I think I can manage breakfast." He smiled like I had said something funny, but there was no warmth in it. "I just worry about you," he said again. I looked at him and thought about how many times I'd heard that line from people who were only worried about themselves. "That's kind of you," I said, and took a sip of coffee. For a few minutes, neither of us spoke. I looked at him carefully. I saw a man who was older, tired, with lines on his forehead that hadn't been there before. But behind his tired eyes, I saw something else. Hesitation, guilt, maybe fear. I remembered when he used to wait for me in the on-call room at the hospital because I couldn't afford a babysitter. He would fall asleep on the couch, covered in my old lab coat, while I worked through the night. When he woke up in the morning, he'd say, "You're my hero, Dr. Mom." I can still hear his voice saying it, half asleep, proud of me. Looking at him now, sitting across from me at the same kitchen table, I wondered when he had stopped being that little boy who admired me and became the man who thought I was a problem to solve. He looked down, pretending to read something on his phone, and said quietly, "Marissa and I were talking last night about your situation." "My situation?" I repeated. "You've worked so hard, Mom," he said, his voice careful. "You deserve to enjoy life, to be around people. There's this place, Silver Pines Residence. It's beautiful. It's not a nursing home. It's like a community for independent seniors. They have activities, gardens, great food, medical staff on site. You'd love it." I took another sip of coffee and watched him. He wasn't nervous anymore. He was rehearsed. He'd practiced this speech. "Silver Pines," I said slowly. "Sounds expensive." He smiled, relieved that I hadn't said no right away. "It's not cheap, but it's worth it. And it's safe. You'd have people around all the time. No more being alone. We could visit every week." "I'm sure you could," I said. He didn't pick up on the tone in my voice. He kept going. "There's even a golf course nearby, and a spa. You'd have your own apartment. It's perfect, Mom." I nodded slowly. "Perfect for who?" He froze. "What do you mean?" I met his eyes. "You mean perfect for me or perfect for you and Marissa?" He blinked a few times. "Mom, come on. That's not fair." "Fair has nothing to do with it," I said. "I just want to know whose idea this was." He rubbed his forehead. "We both thought of it. We just want you to be safe." That word again. Safe. It sounded less like care and more like containment. I looked at him, really looked at him, and saw my own son sitting there, lying to me like a stranger. "Something tells me this is more about comfort than safety," I said. He sighed. "You're making this harder than it needs to be." "Maybe because I'm not ready to be taken care of," I said, "and definitely not ready to sign myself into a place just because my son feels nervous." He leaned back, defeated but not giving up. "Just promise you'll think about it," he said. "I'll think about it," I answered, because that's what you say when you don't want to argue anymore. He smiled like that was enough. He stood, reached over, and kissed the top of my head. "Love you, Mom," he said. I looked up at him. "Love you too." He left a few minutes later. I watched through the window as he walked to his car. Before driving away, he pulled out his phone and made a call. I couldn't hear what he said, but I didn't need to. I already knew who was on the other end. I stood there for a long time, staring out at the snow. The house felt bigger than ever. The coffee on the table had gone cold. The cinnamon rolls sat untouched. He said they wanted me safe, but I knew better. They wanted me safe, but mostly they wanted me silent. And if that's what they were planning, they were about to learn that I don't go quiet. Not for anyone. By the next morning, I knew I needed help. Not emotional help, not comfort, legal help. I'd seen enough to know what was coming, and if I didn't act fast, I'd lose more than peace of mind. I called Thomas LeBlanc, my lawyer and an old friend. I'd known him for nearly 20 years. He handled the sale of my clinic, my husband's estate, and everything in between. If there was one person I could trust to stay calm, it was Thomas. When I walked into his office downtown, he stood up to greet me. He looked exactly the same, tall, silver hair, that steady kind of man who doesn't waste words. "Vivian," he said, shaking my hand, "it's been too long." "It has," I said, sitting down, "and I wish this was a social visit." He smiled politely. "When it comes to you, it usually isn't." I told him everything. Not all the emotions, not the fear, but the facts. What I saw, what happened to Ruth, and what Daniel said about Silver Pines. I laid it out like a medical case. The signs, the symptoms, the diagnosis. He listened carefully, writing a few notes. When I finished, he leaned back in his chair and tapped his pen against the desk. "Vivian, what you're describing is serious. If they tried once, they might try again. But if they don't, they'll try something else. Maybe something cleaner. Legal." "Legal?" I asked. He nodded. "They could claim you're unfit, mentally or physically. Once a guardianship case starts, it can move quickly. If a judge believes you can't manage your own affairs, you lose control over everything, your money, your property, even where you live." I felt a wave of anger rise, slow and heavy. "So they can declare me incompetent and take everything?" "Yes," he said, "if they have the right paperwork and the right doctor. It's been done before." I thought of Daniel's face when he talked about safety. I thought of Marissa's calm voice on the phone. It all made sense now. The nursing home, the concern, the soft tone. It wasn't kindness, it was strategy. I took a slow breath. Then I'll be the fittest 70-year-old they've ever seen. Thomas smiled a little. "That's a good start. But we can do more than just prove you're capable. We can make it impossible for them to take anything, even if they try." He opened a folder and pulled out a blank form. "We'll set up a trust. It will hold your assets, the money from the clinic, the house, everything. You'll still have full control, but if anyone tries to challenge your competence, the trust will automatically transfer to a charity you name. That means if they come after your money, they lose it by default." I looked at the papers. It was a clean plan. Logical, cold, exactly what I needed. "Which charity?" he asked. "Children's Cancer Research," I said. "My clinic used to support them every year. It's fitting." Thomas nodded. "Good choice. I'll start. The paperwork today. Once it's filed, even a judge can't undo it easily." I watched him write for a few minutes. The sound of his pen scratching across the paper was oddly comforting. It reminded me of the hospital, the quiet moments between emergencies when you could still fix things if you acted fast enough. After a while, he looked up. "Vivian, one more thing. Are you ready for them to find out? Because once they realize they've lost access to your money, they might not give up quietly." I thought for a second. "No," I said. "Let's make them think they've won first." He raised an eyebrow. "You're planning something." "I'm planning to stay alive," I said. "If they think I'm giving them what they want, they'll stop rushing. They'll relax. That's when people make mistakes." Thomas nodded slowly, the corner of his mouth lifting. "I see retirement hasn't dulled your instincts." "I was never good at sitting still," I said. We spent the next hour going over details, medical evaluations, documents to prove my mental competence, emergency contacts, even a power of attorney that only activates under my written approval. Thomas handled it all efficiently, explaining every line so there would be no loopholes. When it was done, he handed me a folder. "Keep this safe," he said. "If anyone tries anything, call me first." I put the folder into my bag and stood up. For the first time since that night, I felt a kind of calm I hadn't felt in years. Not peace exactly, more like control. As I walked out of his office, I could see the snow starting again through the glass doors. It was light, soft, drifting down over the street. I pulled my coat tighter around me and stepped outside. The air was cold and clean. I stood there for a moment watching the snow land on my sleeves and melt. People hurried past me, too busy to notice. The city noises faded behind me as I started walking. Every step left a mark on the thin layer of snow, but when I turned back, the wind had already started to cover them. That made me smile. It was better that way. No traces, no evidence of where I'd been. A week after that meeting with Thomas, I got a call from the hospital. Ruth had woken up. They said she was weak but alert. Short-term memory loss, the nurse said, but she was improving. I thanked her, hung up, and called Marissa right after. I told her I wanted to visit. She hesitated. "Vivian, I don't think that's a good idea," she said. Mom's still very confused. The doctor said too much excitement could slow her recovery. "Excitement," I repeated. "I just want to say hello." "I know," she said, her voice too sweet. "But she needs rest. Maybe next week." That was the moment I knew Marissa didn't want me near her mother. Not because Ruth needed rest, but because Ruth might remember something she shouldn't. I decided to wait a few days, but I didn't plan to stay quiet. By the fourth day, I called an old acquaintance, Carmen Diaz. I first met Carmen 15 years ago when she was still on the Denver police force. She came to me as a patient once, a hand injury from a chase gone wrong. We'd kept in touch after she retired. She now ran a small private investigation service, mostly for insurance fraud and background checks. She was tough, smart, and more importantly, she owed me a favor. When I told her what happened, she didn't act surprised. "You think your daughter-in-law tried to poison you," she said. "I don't think," I said. "I know." Carmen didn't waste time with sympathy. "All right," she said. "Tell me everything you saw." I told her about the bottle, the glass, Ruth's collapse, and the conversation afterward. She listened without interrupting, the way cops do when they already believe you but want every detail clear. When I finished, she said, "If there's poison, there's evidence. You just have to know where to look." "Start wherever you need to," I said. "Just keep it quiet." "Quiet's my specialty," she said. 2 days later, she called. "You won't believe this," she said. "I talked to one of the nurses who worked your party as catering staff. She said they found a small glass vial under the buffet table when they were cleaning up. They thought it was part of the essential oil setup from the decor and tossed it in the trash." My chest tightened. Was it still there? Lucky for us, the catering company keeps a waste log. They already sent the bags to their central facility. I'm heading there now. I waited for hours that felt like days. When she finally called again, her voice was steady. "Got it," she said. "Small brown bottle, no label, still had a few drops inside. I'll get it tested." The next morning, she called with the results. "Oleander extract," she said, "pure. Whoever mixed it knew what they were doing." I didn't say anything for a moment. I just stared out the window at the snow-covered yard. "Marissa's not clever enough to research that," I said quietly. "Daniel must have helped her." "Maybe," Carmen said, "but I checked something else. Marissa's credit card records show multiple purchases over the past month for essential oil droppers, pipettes, and mixing tools. One of those deliveries arrived 3 days before your party." "She's careless," I said. "She's confident," Carmen replied. "People like her think they're untouchable." I sat back in my chair and thought about Ruth. Sweet, quiet Ruth who used to bring store-bought cookies every holiday and apologize that she didn't bake. She didn't deserve what happened. None of us did. Later that afternoon, Carmen called again. Her voice sounded different, heavier. "Vivian," she said, "you might want to sit down for this." "I'm already sitting," I said. "I found a policy, a life insurance policy for $500,000, taken out 6 months ago. The insured is you. The beneficiary is listed as Marissa Cole." I closed my eyes and breathed through my nose. I didn't even need to ask how she pulled that up. Carmen had her ways. "How?" I asked finally. "She's not family by law." "She claimed insurable interest," Carmen said. "As your caregiver. Said you'd been relying on her for daily support since your husband's death." "She must have filled out the forms herself," I said. "Probably," Carmen said. "Most companies don't check too hard if the paperwork looks legitimate. It's not illegal, just unethical. But if you die, the payout's real." "She wanted me gone before Christmas," I said. "Pity, it's my favorite season." Carmen was quiet for a moment. "Vivian, you want me to go to the police with this?" "Not yet," I said. "You already have enough proof to make a case," she said. "The poison, the bottle, the insurance. That's motive and method right there." "I know," I said, "but I need more. They'll deny everything. They'll say Ruth mixed up her drink or that someone else brought the bottle. If we go too early, they'll wriggle out of it." "You sure you want to wait?" she asked. "I've spent my life waiting for test results, Carmen," I said. "The more patient you are, the clearer the poison settles. She laughed softly. You always did talk like a doctor. I am a doctor, I said. I just stopped working in hospitals. We ended the call. That night I sat in my study with the lights off, the only glow coming from the lamp over my desk. The snow had stopped and the street outside was quiet. I opened my notebook again and started a new page. At the top, I wrote motive. Underneath it, I listed money from sale, $23 million. Life insurance, $500,000. Guardianship plan, total control. I stared at those numbers until they blurred together. It was almost elegant, the way they'd planned it. Simple and predictable. Poison me at my own party, make it look like natural. Causes, then move me into a safe home if it failed. The only mistake they made was thinking I wasn't watching. The phone buzzed on my desk, a message from Carmen. Found her emails to Daniel. We'll call in the morning. I put the phone face down and leaned back in my chair. For the first time since the party, I felt a strange kind of calm. I wasn't helpless. I wasn't scared. I was simply waiting. And I've always been good at waiting. By late afternoon, the sky had turned gray. The snow was falling again, light but steady, the kind that makes the whole world quiet. The house felt too still, no music, no television, not even the sound of the clock in the hallway. I sat at the kitchen table waiting. I knew they would come. Around 6, I saw their car pull into the driveway. The headlights moved across the front windows, then went dark. A few seconds later, the doorbell rang. When I opened the door, Daniel was holding a black folder, and Marissa stood beside him, smiling too widely. Hi, Vivian, she said in that overly warm tone people use when they're trying to hide nerves. We thought we'd stop by. We have everything ready for you. I stepped aside. Everything for what? For Silver Pines, she said quickly. The retirement community. We already filled out most of the forms for you. You'll just need to sign where we marked. She held up the folder like it was a gift. I could see neat tabs sticking out, color-coded, every detail organized. Marissa was proud of her work. Come in, I said, moving aside. It's cold. They followed me into the living room. The fire was burning low. I kept the lights dim on purpose, soft enough to make the room look peaceful, but dark enough that they couldn't read me easily. Daniel set the folder on the coffee table. We just need your signature on a few things, he said. The admission contract, the health release, and the financial disclosure. It's pretty standard. I nodded slowly. That's a lot of paperwork. It's better to do it now, Marissa said. That way you'll have everything ready when the place opens up a unit next week. They don't hold spots long. I watched the way they moved around the room. Daniel's eyes kept drifting to the framed photos on the shelves, to the paintings, to the vase on the mantel. He wasn't looking, he was evaluating. I could see it. Marissa ran her fingers along the piano keys as she walked past, like she was already deciding where she put it in their house once I was settled. They thought I didn't notice. They'd forgotten who raised Daniel. Would you like some coffee? I asked. No, thank you, Marissa said quickly. We already had some. I sat down in my chair and gestured toward the folder. All right then, I said. Show me what you've got. Marissa sat across from me and opened the folder. Each page had a sticky note with a highlighted section and a little arrow pointing to the signature line. Just here and here, she said, tapping the papers with her manicured nail. We already filled in all your personal information. It'll save you time. I looked at her face as she said it, calm, confident, rehearsed. She'd practiced this moment, maybe even in the mirror. I reached for the pen she offered me. My hand trembled a little and she smiled, mistaking the movement for weakness. Don't rush, she said sweetly. We can go through it together. That's all right, I said. I trust you. She relaxed, leaning back in her chair. Daniel exhaled quietly. They both thought the hard part was over. I opened the first page, glanced at the text, and signed my name slowly. The pen made a soft scratching sound on the paper, steady and deliberate. I flipped through a few more pages and kept signing. They didn't know that every page in that folder had been replaced earlier that day. Identical forms, same formatting, same layout, but every signature line led to a completely harmless copy Thomas had drawn up for me. The real papers were locked away in my study, and these ones would go straight into the fire once they left. In anesthesia, timing is everything, I said quietly, more to myself than to them. 1 second too soon, you kill the patient. 1 second too late, they wake up. I was right on time. Marissa looked up. What did you say? Nothing, I said. just thinking out loud. She smiled again, nervous this time. You always were so sharp. I try to be. When I finished signing, I closed the folder and slid it back toward her. There, I said. All done. Perfect, Daniel said. He sounded almost relieved. This is really for the best, Mom. You'll love it there. I'm sure I will, I said. Marissa stood up, clutching the folder like it was treasure. We'll take this to the admissions office tomorrow morning, she said. They'll process everything right away. Good idea, I said. You two always know how to handle things. She smiled again, this time with her teeth. You raised us well. I didn't answer. They left not long after, still talking about schedules and visits and how exciting this next chapter would be. I walked them to the door, waved as they drove off, and watched their taillights disappear down the snowy road. When the sound of the car faded, I locked the door and stood in the hallway for a while. The house was silent again, just the faint hiss of the wind outside. I turned off the lights one by one and walked into the study. The real folder was on my desk, next to the envelope Thomas had delivered that morning. Inside were the trust papers and the revised will, everything legally airtight. I poured myself a small glass of wine and sat down. For a few minutes, I just listened to the quiet, the sound of the wind against the window, the ticking of the clock in the other room. They thought they had outsmarted me. They thought I'd fallen for their plan. But I'd been running operations longer than they'd been alive. They didn't realize I wasn't signing my future away. I was just giving them the illusion of control. And like any good anesthesiologist, I knew exactly how to keep someone calm right before the real procedure began. 2 days after Daniel and Marissa's visit, I woke up to an email from Carmen Diaz. The subject line read, "You need to hear this." Inside was an audio file and a set of printed screenshots. She'd labeled everything neatly, just like she used to do on her police reports. I clicked the audio file first. The voice that came through was deep and careful, a man speaking in that overly professional tone you hear from people who like to sound smarter than they are. "This is Dr. Richard Stein," he said. "Yes, I've spoken with Daniel several times. He's very concerned about his mother's mental state. I can make time next week for an evaluation. If the family needs documentation for guardianship, I'll make sure the report supports their concerns." He paused, then said, "And thank you for the payment. I'll send confirmation once it clears." The clip ended there. I didn't move for a long moment. I just sat at my kitchen table with my laptop open, staring at the screen. Then I opened the next file. Screenshots of emails between Daniel and this doctor. The messages were short and to the point. Daniel wrote, "We need to make sure her test results show early dementia. The judge will need proof before approving the transfer." Stein replied, "Understood. My evaluation fee remains the same. I'll word it carefully to avoid suspicion." The last screenshot was a bank transfer receipt. $10,000 from Daniel's business account to a consulting firm listed under Stein's name. The date was 2 weeks before my retirement party. For a long time, I didn't speak. I didn't cry either. I just sat there with my hands flat on the table, breathing slowly. They hadn't just planned to take my money. They were building a full legal case to take my life away piece by piece. My name, my decisions, my control. If the poisoning didn't work, they'd declare me incompetent and lock me away in that place they called a community. That morning, the house was so quiet I could hear the clock ticking from the next room. I picked up the phone and called Carmen. "Got your files?" I said. "You listened?" she asked. "Yes." "You okay?" "I'm fine," I said. "More fine than they'll be when this is done. You want me to keep digging?" "No," I said. "You've done enough. It's time for me to handle the rest." She hesitated. "Be careful, Vivian. People do stupid things when they realize they've lost." "I know," I said softly, "but they don't know I've already won." After I hung up, I called Thomas LeBlanc. He picked up on the second ring. "Thomas, it's me," I said. He could tell from my tone something had changed. "What happened?" "Carmen found proof," I said. "Audio and emails. Daniel paid a psychiatrist to write a fake report saying I'm mentally unfit. He's planning to use it with the power of attorney paperwork they think I signed." I could hear him exhale slowly on the other end. "That's serious," he said. "With that kind of evidence, we can go straight to the authorities." "Not yet," I said. "Why not?" "Because tomorrow I'm going to give them exactly what they want, my signature, and then I'll give the world theirs." He didn't speak right away. When he did, his voice was steady. "You have a plan." "I do," I said. And it's clean. They'll walk right into it. He sighed. I shouldn't say this as your lawyer, but you've always had a talent for strategy. I learned from the best, I said. You taught me that paper trails can bury people faster than bullets. Thomas chuckled softly, but I could hear the concern in his voice. Be careful, Vivian. I will, I said. You just be ready for my call. After we hung up, I sat back in my chair and listened to the sound of the clock again. It was the only thing in the room that moved. Each tick felt louder than the one before it. I looked around my house, the framed pictures, the certificates from my clinic, the old books stacked in the corner. Everything in that room represented a life I'd built from nothing. Every bit of it was something they had tried to take. I picked up the printed emails and read them one more time. The proof was all there, their lies in writing, their greed recorded in their own words. The truth was finally on paper, and for once it was mine to use. I put the documents into a folder, sealed it, and set it on the desk beside my coat. I'd take it to Thomas in the morning before they showed up. Outside, the snow had stopped. The night was still and cold, the kind of quiet that feels like the world is waiting. I looked at the clock again. The second hand moved forward with a faint click. 1, 2, 3. Tomorrow the clock would run out on them, and as I sat there in the dim light, I whispered to myself, let them sleep well tonight. They'll need it. Friday morning came wrapped in silence, the kind of silence that only heavy snow can bring. The sky was a dull gray, the light flat and silver against the white outside. From my kitchen window, I watched the flakes falling in slow, steady waves, covering the driveway and the footprints from the mail carrier who'd come earlier. I'd already been up since 5. I showered, made coffee, and set out 3 cups. 1 for me, 2 for them. Every small detail of the morning felt deliberate, like lining up instruments before surgery. At exactly 9 o'clock, I heard the crunch of tires on snow. Their car pulled in right on time. Daniel and Marissa got out, bundled in coats, smiling as if this was just another cheerful visit. Daniel carried a briefcase. Marissa held her laptop in another folder, the same black one from last time. Their breath came out in white clouds as they hurried up the steps. When I opened the door, Marissa smiled brightly. Good morning, Vivian, she said. We didn't want to be late. Big day today. Of course, I said softly. Come in. They stepped inside, brushing snow from their shoulders. I led them into the living room. The fire was burning low again, just enough to keep the air warm. Everything looked peaceful, calm even. That was how I wanted it. Daniel set his briefcase on the coffee table and started unpacking papers. I printed everything out, he said. Just the final signatures left. Marissa placed her laptop beside him, opening it quickly. We'll keep a digital copy too, she said. It's easier for the facility to process. I moved to the kitchen, poured the coffee, and brought the cups over. Cream and sugar are there if you need them. Thank you, Mom, Daniel said, smiling. I sat down across from them, folded my hands in my lap, and watched them work. The sound of the papers moving, the laptop keys clicking, and the pen tapping the table filled the silence. They talked softly to each other, like colleagues reviewing a contract, not family finalizing a betrayal. Marissa handed me a pen. We marked everything for you, she said. Just sign where the yellow tabs are. The power of attorney form is first, then the resident's admission. Her tone was smooth and practiced, like she'd said the same words many times in her head. I nodded. You two really thought of everything. She smiled. We just want this to go smoothly. I opened the first page and pretended to read. I already knew every word, every fake paragraph Thomas had written into the decoy documents. I ran my finger down the page slowly, then looked up at them. Daniel leaned forward, resting his elbows on his knees. This is the right decision, Mom. You'll be so much happier once you're settled in. I looked at him for a long moment. I trust you both, I said. He smiled again, relieved. That means a lot. The pen felt heavy in my hand. I started, signing, slow, deliberate strokes. Each letter of my name came out neat and steady. With every signature, I could feel the air in the room tightening. They didn't notice, but I did. The sound of the pen on paper was sharp, a small, dry scrape like the sound of a knife being tested on stone. Marissa leaned forward slightly, watching me. Perfect, she said. You're almost done. I looked up at her. Almost. The last form waited at the bottom of the pile. I placed my hand on it but didn't move. The house was quiet again, too quiet. For a moment, the only sound was the soft hum of the heater and the faint ticking of the clock in the hallway. Then the doorbell rang. The sound sliced through the stillness. Daniel froze halfway to standing. Marissa blinked, confused, and then smiled again, trying to keep her voice calm. Who could that be? "I'll get it," I said. I stood, walked to the door, and opened it. The wind blew a little snow into the entryway. Standing on my porch was Detective Lisa Morrison, wearing a long dark coat dusted with snow. Behind her were 2 uniformed officers. She looked at me, then past me, into the house. "Mrs. Cole," she said politely, "we need to speak with you and your family." I stepped aside. "Of course, Detective, come in." Daniel's face went pale. Marissa didn't move. Lisa and the officers walked in, their boots leaving small wet prints on the rug. She nodded toward the table. "I hope we're not interrupting anything important." "No," I said evenly. "Just some paperwork." Lisa looked at Daniel, then at Marissa. "I believe you're Mrs. Cole's son and daughter-in-law?" Daniel cleared his throat. "That's right. Is there a problem?" Lisa reached into her coat and pulled out a folder. "We received the toxicology results from St. Mary's Hospital." Marissa's smile wavered. "Toxicology?" Lisa opened the folder and glanced at the papers inside. The test confirmed that Mrs. Ruth Parker ingested a concentrated dose of oleander extract during your mother's retirement party. That's not medication, Mrs. Cole. It's a lethal plant toxin. Daniel's mouth fell open slightly. "That's impossible," he said. "There must be some mistake." Lisa looked at him calmly. The same toxin was found in the champagne bottle used at the party. Marissa's fingers tightened around her coffee cup, her knuckles white. She didn't speak. I stood behind them, watching quietly. Lisa looked up again, her tone steady. "We'll need both of you to come with us for further questioning." The silence that followed was long and heavy. Daniel tried to speak, but the words wouldn't come out. Marissa looked straight ahead, her smile frozen, the color draining from her face. I looked down at the papers still spread across the table, my fake signatures sitting there like traps that had already been sprung. Then I looked at the clock on the wall. The second hand moved forward with a quiet, steady tick. The storm outside was getting worse, and as the detective read them their rights, I thought to myself, the storm's been coming for a long time. The house felt smaller that morning. The air was heavy, the light gray and dull through the curtains. The officers stood by the door, quiet but alert. Detective Morrison had taken over the living room, her folder open on the table. Daniel and Marissa sat side by side on the couch. Neither spoke. Daniel's hands were clasped together tightly, his eyes on the floor. Marissa kept her chin high, but her face was pale. Lisa's voice broke the silence. "The toxicology results confirm the presence of oleander extract in the champagne consumed at the retirement party." She looked up, her eyes steady. The same compound was found in the bottle retrieved from this house, and on this small glass vial. She opened a plastic evidence bag and held it up. Inside was the tiny brown bottle Carmen had recovered. Lisa continued, "The lab matched the fingerprints on the vial to you, Mrs. Marissa Cole." Marissa's breath caught. "That's not possible," she said quickly. "I was setting up the drinks. Maybe I touched it by accident." Lisa didn't answer. She simply set the bag down on the table beside the folder. The only sound was the ticking of the clock. I walked over to the cabinet near the fireplace and pressed a small button on the wall. The television turned on with a low hum. A few seconds later, the living room camera feed appeared on screen. Clear, sharp, time-stamped. Marissa's head jerked up. "What is this?" I didn't answer. The video showed the night of the party. People laughing, moving around the kitchen. The camera angle from above caught Marissa standing by the champagne table. She glanced around, reached into her purse, and pulled out a small vial. She poured it into a single glass, the one with the chipped rim. The room was silent except for the faint sound of the recording playing. Daniel stared at the screen, frozen. Marissa turned toward him. I was adding flavoring," she said, her voice breaking. "It wasn't poison." Lisa didn't move. "We've already confirmed what was in that bottle," she said. "And it wasn't flavoring." I looked at Marissa, my voice steady. "You should have studied toxicology better, dear. Oleander binds to calcium. You never stood a chance of hiding it." Her face twisted. "You can't prove it was meant for you," she shouted. I stepped closer, my voice quiet but cold. "I switched our glasses. You poisoned your mother instead." The room froze. For a moment, there was no sound at all. Then the hallway door opened slowly. Ruth stepped forward, pale but standing. Her eyes were watery but clear. Marissa stared at her like she was seeing a ghost. "Mom?" Ruth's voice trembled, but every word hit hard. "You tried to kill her," she said, "and you killed me instead." Marissa shook her head. No, that's not true. You're fine. You're standing here." "I almost wasn't," Ruth said. "Do you have any idea what it's like to wake up and hear that your own daughter might have been the reason you almost died?" Marissa tried to speak, but her voice cracked. She looked to Daniel for help. He just sat there, hands covering his face. When he finally looked up, his eyes were red. "I didn't know," he said quietly. "She told me it was just to scare you, to make you agree to the move. I didn't know she was going to use anything real." I looked at him, my tone flat. "You can't scare someone who's already seen death too many times, Daniel." He dropped his head, sobbing quietly. Lisa turned to Marissa. "Mrs. Cole," she said, "you're under arrest for attempted murder and insurance fraud." The officer stepped forward. Marissa didn't fight when they lifted her from the couch. She just stared at me, not angry, not pleading, just empty. "I loved you like a mother," she said softly. "No," I said. "You loved my money." They led her toward the door. Daniel didn't move. He just sat there, shoulders slumped, watching his wife disappear out into the snow. Ruth stood beside me, shaking slightly. I placed a hand on her arm. "You don't have to stay," I said. She nodded but didn't speak. Her eyes followed her daughter until the door closed behind the police. The room fell silent again. The only sound left was the faint hum of the television still showing the pause frame. Marissa, caught mid-motion, pouring the contents of the vial into the glass. I walked over and turned it off. The screen went black. Daniel looked up at me through his tears. "I didn't want this," he said. "I swear, Mom. I just wanted to fix things." "You broke things," I said simply. "And some things don't get fixed." He nodded slowly, staring at the floor. Lisa approached me before leaving. "We'll need your full statement later," she said quietly. "But for now, I think we have what we need." "Thank you, Detective," I said. She gave me a short nod, then turned to go. The officers led Daniel outside after Marissa, not in cuffs, but close enough. When the door closed, the house was still again. I stood in the middle of the living room, looking around. Everything was just as it had been an hour ago. The coffee cups, the papers, the faint smell of the fire, but the air had changed. The storm outside had reached its peak. The wind howled against the windows, shaking the glass slightly. I looked at my reflection in the dark television screen. My face looked calm. Too calm. There was no joy in it. No victory. Just silence. Justice doesn't always feel like winning. Sometimes it just feels like the end. The house had never felt so quiet. No voices, no footsteps, no sound of the heater turning on and off. Just stillness. It was strange how fast a place could go from being full of noise and tension to absolute silence. For a long time, I just stood in the living room, staring at the space where Daniel and Marissa had been sitting earlier that morning. The coffee cups were still there, the papers, the small mark from Marissa's shoe on the rug. Everything looked normal, but nothing felt normal anymore. By noon, the snow had stopped. The light outside was cold and flat, the kind that makes everything look cleaner than it really is. I made myself another cup of coffee, though I barely drank it. When the doorbell rang, I didn't flinch. I knew who it would be. Thomas LeBlanc stood on the porch, holding a thin folder under his arm. He looked tired but calm, as always. I let him in. "I came as soon as I heard," he said. "You all right?" "I'm fine," I said. "They're gone." He nodded and walked into the living room. "It's over then." "Over," I repeated. "That's one word for it." He placed the folder on the table. "These are the final documents. The trust and charitable fund have been triggered automatically. Everything is protected. The assets, the clinic money, the house, all locked under your name. If anyone ever tries to challenge your competency again, the estate transfers directly to the foundation. No loopholes." I looked at the folder but didn't touch it. "So it's really done." "Yes," he said softly. "You're safe now." I nodded, though I didn't feel safe. Not in the way he meant. I'd won, technically. The truth was out, the law had done its job, and the money was secure. But inside, there was no feeling of victory, just a strange kind of quiet. Thomas must have sensed it. He poured himself a glass of water from the kitchen and sat down across from me. "You did the right thing," he said. "I know," I said. "Justice feels less like victory, and more like surgery. Necessary, but it still hurts." He nodded. "That's the best way to put it." We sat there for a while without saying much, the kind of silence that isn't uncomfortable, just heavy. He eventually stood and picked up his coat. "You should rest," he said. "Let me know if you need anything." "I will," I said. When he left, I stayed in the living room. The light was fading now, turning everything a softer gray. I went to the cabinet and took out a bottle of wine. A new one, unopened, clean. I poured a small glass and carried it to the mantel where my husband's picture sat. It was the same picture I'd kept for 20 years. Him in his white coat, smiling the way doctors used to in old hospital photos. I looked at it for a long time. "You were right," I said quietly. "People's hands tell the truth before their mouths do." I took a sip of wine. It was dry, almost bitter, but it went down smooth. The clock ticked softly in the hallway. Outside, the wind had picked up again, but not enough to rattle the windows. Just enough to remind me the world was still moving, even if I wasn't. I looked around the house, at the photographs, the books, the furniture that had been mine for decades. Everything was exactly as it had been, yet the air felt different. Lighter in some ways, heavier in others. Maybe justice doesn't give peace. Maybe it just gives space. Space to breathe, to think, to be alone with what's left. I sat back down at the table next to the untouched folder Thomas had left. The wine glass was still half full. In the reflection on the glass, I saw myself. Not the doctor I used to be, not the mother, not even the survivor. Just a woman who had done what needed to be done. Outside, the snow began to fall again, soft and slow. I whispered to the empty room, "It's finally quiet." And for the first time in a long time, it truly was. 3 months passed before I realized winter was finally over. The snow that had covered everything for so long was gone. The yard looked brown and uneven, but there were small signs of life. The first shoots of grass, the thin green lines pushing through the soil by the porch steps. I hadn't noticed how much I missed color until I saw it again. That morning, I met Ruth at a small cafe downtown, the same one where my husband and I used to stop after church years ago. It was warm inside, the kind of quiet place that smelled like real coffee and old wood. Ruth was already there, sitting by the window. She looked older somehow, not just tired, but different. Her hair had turned almost completely white, though she tried to hide it with a soft scarf. When she saw me, she smiled, and I saw a little light return to her face. "You look good," I said as I sat down. "So do you," she said, though her voice trembled a little. We ordered coffee and sat for a while without talking much. There was no need to fill the silence anymore. We both knew what the other had been through. When she finally spoke, her words came slow. "I still can't believe she did it," she said. "My own daughter." I nodded. Belief takes time. Acceptance takes longer. She looked down at her hands. I keep thinking about that night, about how close I came to not waking up, about how she looked at me, smiling. I don't know if I'll ever forget it. "You won't," I said quietly. "But it stops hurting after a while. It just becomes part of the story." She smiled faintly. "You sound like a doctor again." "Old habits," I said. We finished our coffee, then decided to take a walk. The air outside was crisp, still carrying a bit of chill, but the sun was out. The streets were damp from the melting snow, and the air smelled clean. We ended up walking toward the old cemetery on Elm Street. It wasn't planned, but neither of us questioned it. Sometimes grief pulls you where it needs to go. When we reached my husband's grave, I stopped. The grass around the headstone was still thin from winter, but the ground had thawed. Someone, maybe Thomas, had left a small bunch of daffodils there. I stood looking down at the stone for a moment. Then I said softly, "He wanted me to trust family." I finally learned he forgot to specify which ones. Ruth laughed. A real laugh this time, small and rough, but real. "That's a good line," she said. "He'd appreciate it," I said. We stayed there for a while, not saying much. The wind moved gently through the trees, carrying the sound of birds that had just returned from wherever they'd been hiding all winter. After a few minutes, Ruth turned to me. "I've been thinking," she said, "about what to do next, about making something out of all this." "I've been thinking the same," I said. She looked at me, curious. "What did you have in mind?" I smiled. "A foundation. Something for people like us, older folks who get taken advantage of by the people they trust. We could call it the Second Chance Foundation." Ruth nodded slowly. "I like that." "It won't change what happened," I said, "but it might help someone else see the signs before it's too late." "That's worth doing," she said. We started walking back toward the cafe. The sun was higher now, the snow melting faster. Water ran down the gutters in little streams, catching the light as it moved. At one point, Ruth laughed again, a lighter sound this time, easier. I found myself laughing too. It had been months since either of us had done that without forcing it. For the first time in a long time, the sound didn't feel out of place. It felt like life coming back. When we reached the corner, we stopped to say goodbye. Ruth touched my arm gently. "You know," she said, "you may have lost family, but you found a friend." "I'll take that trade," I said. She smiled, and for a moment we just stood there, two women who had both survived their own storms. The sunlight caught the edge of her scarf as she turned to go. I watched her walk down the street until she disappeared into the crowd. Then I looked up at the sky, clear, bright, the color of early spring. For months, everything in my life had been cold, gray, and quiet. But now, the world felt new again. Maybe that was what justice was supposed to lead to. Not happiness, not revenge, just the chance to start over. I took a slow breath, let the air fill my lungs, and for the first time in a long while, I didn't feel alone. The mail came late that day. The sky was clear for once, a soft blue that felt like spring finally meant to stay. The snow had almost vanished, just small piles left in the corners of the yard where the sun hadn't reached yet. I was sitting at the kitchen table when I heard the sound of the mail slot click. When I went to check, there was only one envelope on the floor. Cream-colored, neat handwriting, my name written in blue ink. The return address said Ava Cole. I hadn't heard from my granddaughter in months. After everything that happened, I wasn't sure if I ever would. She'd been staying with her aunt while her parents' case moved through the system. I had kept my distance, not wanting to drag her through the mess her parents had made. But now, here was her letter, small and simple, like a heartbeat coming through paper. I sat down, took a deep breath, and opened it carefully. "Dear Grandma, I got accepted to Northwestern pre-law. I know it's what you always wanted for me, to use my brain to stand up for people who can't. I think I want to help people like you someday. People who get tricked or pushed around just because they're older. I guess justice runs in our blood after all. I love you. I miss you. I'll visit when school starts. Love, Ava." I read it twice, then again. Her handwriting was steady, careful, a little like mine when I was her age. I could almost hear her voice in every line, clear, hopeful, determined. For the first time in months, I felt something warm in my chest that wasn't anger or defense, just pride. She was the future of our family, the one good thing that survived the storm. I folded the letter and placed it on the table beside my notebook. The same notebook where I'd written every detail of what had happened, every date, every lie, every plan that tried to break me. It wasn't anger that made me keep it. It was memory. I stood up and walked to the back door. The air outside smelled different now. Damp earth, clean rain, something alive again. The last bits of snow were melting off the railing. Beneath them, tiny purple flowers had started to bloom. Primroses. The first flowers of the year. I stepped out onto the porch, feeling the wood creak gently under my feet. The sun was low, soft, the kind that touches everything without burning. I held Ava's letter in my hand and looked out across the yard. "They thought age made me forgetful," I said softly, "but memory is a weapon." The wind picked up slightly, brushing against my face, carrying the faint smell of wet soil and pine. And I've spent a lifetime learning how to use it. For a moment, everything was still. The air, the trees, even the sound of the birds. Then a breeze passed through, lifting the edge of Ava's letter just enough to make it flutter. Inside the house, the old clock ticked once, the same steady rhythm it had always kept. I turned back toward the door, but stopped. The world looked softer now, not lighter, just calmer. Justice had come and gone. What remained was survival. I walked back inside, set the letter next to my journal, and picked up my pen. The page was blank. I wrote slowly, the way I always did. The glass she poisoned was the mirror she shattered. I looked at the words for a long time. Then I closed the book. Outside, the wind kept blowing, light and steady. Somewhere, a bird began to sing. And for the first time in a very long time, the sound didn't feel lonely.